Late-night roads have a way of feeling quieter than they should, the kind of quiet that settles over everything like a thin layer of dust. Most people don't think twice about the hum of tires on asphalt or the soft flicker of distant streetlights, but there's something about those empty stretches of highway and backroads that makes every sound carry a little farther. In the dark, the world seems slower, gentler even, as if nothing bad could possibly fit into all that open space. You notice the steady rhythm of your engine, the faint whistle of wind slipping past the windows, and for a moment you feel completely alone in the safest way, like the road belongs only to you. But that kind of quiet can make small things stand out. A pair of headlights too steady in your mirror, a shadow that moves a little differently than the trees, or the way a distant engine seems to match your speed even when you're not really paying attention. Sometimes it's nothing more than coincidence, two people heading in the same direction at the same time, but when the road empties and the sky feels close, coincidence starts to feel a little too deliberate. And you start to wonder why that vehicle behind you hasn't turned off yet. Most people who talk about these moments describe the same shift, a point where the air inside the car feels heavier, where every glance at the mirror starts lasting a second longer than it should. You don't see danger right away, you just sense that something is out of place, something that doesn't belong on a night that quiet. And by the time you finally realize the truck behind you isn't just another traveler on the road, you've already crossed the line between a normal drive and the beginning of something you won't forget. I was driving home later than usual that night, the kind of late where the world feels hollow and unfinished, like everyone else has gone to bed and forgotten to take the noise with them. The highway stretched out in front of me like a long, dark ribbon, empty in both directions, and the only light came from my own headlights cutting through the soft haze drifting just above the road. The air outside looked cold even though the heater kept the cabin warm, and every time I exhaled I heard that faint, low hum inside the car that reminded me how quiet everything else was. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, almost like the road belonged to me alone, and I could let my mind wander without worrying about anything except the sound of tires rolling over clean asphalt. It must have been half an hour into the drive when I first noticed the glow of headlights behind me. They were far back at first, just a faint pair of white dots flickering over the rise of the road. It didn't seem strange to see another car out there, but something about the way those lights appeared so slowly, so evenly caught my attention. I kept checking my rearview mirror without meaning to, watching those 2 points of light follow the curve of the highway with a strange kind of patience. They didn't speed up. They didn't fall behind. They just stayed there, matching the distance like I was pulling them on a rope. And that was when I felt the first flicker of unease, small enough to ignore but noticeable enough that I couldn't quite shake it. I changed lanes at one point not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see if the truck, because by then I could see the shape of a pickup, would do the same. At first it didn't. It stayed in the right lane while I moved to the left, and I tried to convince myself that meant nothing. But a few seconds later, it glided over as well, casual and unhurried, like it had just remembered that it preferred the left lane. I felt the shift in the air inside my chest then, a kind of tightening I've only felt a handful of times in my life. I lowered the music to hear the road better, as if the sound of my own tires might tell me something the mirror couldn't. The pickup stayed behind me for miles, never getting close enough to seem threatening, but never dipping back far enough to seem uninterested. It just hovered there, steady as a heartbeat. I tried to explain it to myself the way you do when you don't want to feel paranoid. Maybe we were just going the same way, maybe they liked to drive at the same speed, maybe the highway was more populated than it felt. But every time I glanced into the mirror, I saw that familiar white rectangle of a hood and those unwavering headlights. And each glance made me feel a little more awake, a little more aware of how isolating that road really was. At one point, I tried slowing down, not drastically, just enough that any normal driver would naturally pass me. Instead, the pickup slowed too, keeping the same perfect distance. That was when the cold feeling slipped down the back of my neck, the one that made me sit up straighter and grip the wheel a little tighter. I nudged the speed back up, testing the theory again, and the truck followed like it had been waiting for me to decide. I kept my eyes on the road but could feel my pulse starting to tick faster, the way it does right before something changes. The highway eventually opened to a stretch where the land went flat in every direction, nothing but fields and dark silhouettes of distant trees. The sky looked low and heavy, and the air inside the car felt warmer than I wanted it to. I could see the faint glimmer of something painted on the pickup's hood when the road curved just right, and that simple detail, when I hadn't noticed before, made the situation feel more real. You know how, when you're scared, every little thing takes on meaning. That was how it felt. I didn't want to be dramatic, but there was no other traffic, no towns for miles, and no reason for a truck to shadow me like that unless it was intentional. The moment that pushed my nerves from uneasy to genuinely afraid came when I decided to take the next exit, one that led to a small gas station I knew always stayed open late. I signaled early, almost too early, hoping maybe the truck would keep going and I'd feel stupid for being jumpy. But as I merged toward the ramp, the pickup slipped in behind me without hesitation, its headlights dipping slightly along the curve like it had been expecting my move. My heartbeat felt louder than the hum of the engine, and I remember swallowing so hard it hurt. The exit road was short, and the gas station sat at the end of it like a small island of fluorescent light in an ocean of darkness. I pulled in and parked close to the glass storefront, where the cashier could see me if anything went wrong. For the first time, the pickup didn't follow me into the lot. Instead, it stopped right at the edge of the road, half in the shadow, half in the spill of the station lights. The engine rumbled quietly, steady and deep, and the truck didn't move any farther. It just sat there, angled slightly toward me like it was keeping the same distance as before, only now it was still. I stayed in the car longer than I meant to, hands resting on the wheel while I watched the truck's silhouette through the glass. My headlights illuminated the front windows of the gas station, but the pickup appeared as a darker shape against the night, almost blending into it except for the faint glint of chrome along its bumper. I couldn't see the driver. The windows were just dark enough to hide whoever was inside, if anyone was inside at all. That part bothered me more than anything, the idea that I couldn't tell whether I was being watched. After a few minutes, the engine of the pickup changed pitch just slightly, like the person inside shifted their weight or adjusted something. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, the truck rolled backward down the road, its taillights glowing faintly before it turned and disappeared around the bend. It didn't speed off. It didn't make a point of leaving fast. It left in the same slow, controlled way it had followed me, and for some reason that quiet exit made the whole thing feel even worse. I stayed at that gas station for almost an hour. I bought a coffee I didn't drink. I walked aisles I didn't need to walk. I waited long after I knew the road was empty again, and even after I finally got back on the highway, I kept checking the mirror every few seconds, certain I'd see those same headlights appear over the horizon like they had before. They never did. The rest of the drive home was silent, steady, and uneventful, but the tension hung in my shoulders all night, even as I pulled into my driveway and shut the door behind me. I still think about that white pickup and I still don't know what it wanted. Maybe it was a stranger with a strange way of driving. Maybe it was someone lost or bored or oblivious to the fear they caused. Or maybe deep down, I know there was intention in the way they moved, in the way they waited, in the way they left only after I was somewhere safe. That's the part that stays with me, the quietest part of the whole night. Not the following, not the waiting, but the certainty that whoever was in that truck wasn't finished with whatever they were thinking. They simply chose not to do it that night. I used to walk home from work most evenings. A quiet 30-minute route through the neighborhood where the streetlights buzzed low and the air felt cool against my face. It wasn't a busy place, and by the time my shift ended, most houses were already dark except for the occasional porch lamp or the soft blue glow of a TV flickering behind a curtain. Those walks became a kind of routine I relied on, a moment to breathe after long hours, to listen to the hum of bugs along the gutters and the distant hum of someone's AC unit cycling on. I never felt unsafe. If anything, the emptiness made everything predictable, and you start depending on that predictability more than you realize. The evening this happened started no differently. I remember the sky was still holding onto the last traces of dusk, a sort of washed-out lavender fading into darker shades as I stepped out from the back door of the building. There was a light breeze that night, just enough to rattle the aluminum signs near the parking lot, and the sound blended into the familiar chorus of nighttime noises. As I wrapped my jacket a little tighter and started down the narrow road that led toward the main street, thinking mostly about what leftovers I had at home. I didn't notice anything odd yet, but as I turned the corner, I saw the shape of a truck idling near the far end of the lot. At first, I didn't think much of it. Trucks were common in that area and people sometimes sat in their vehicles before heading out. But there was something about the way this one was positioned, angled slightly toward the sidewalk as if following the curve of the path I had just stepped onto. Its headlights were on bright enough that the gravel in front of it was washed white. The beams didn't flicker or fade, they just held steady, cutting through the dimness in a way that felt too deliberate. As I kept walking, telling myself it was nothing, but the longer I stayed in the truck's line of sight, the more aware I became of that unbroken light behind me. I reached the edge of the lot and stepped onto the main road, expecting the truck to pull away or at least shift in position. Instead, it stayed where it was, engine humming in a low, steady rumble. The headlights didn't blink or change, and even though I wasn't looking directly at them anymore, I could feel their presence behind me like a warm, unwanted hand on the back of my neck. I tried not to give the thought space. People idle in their cars all the time. Maybe the driver was texting or waiting for someone or finishing a call. There were 100 normal explanations, and yet, with every step I took, I couldn't help noticing the absence of movement behind me. A few minutes later, as I reached the first bend near the old community center, I heard an engine rev softly. Not loud, not aggressive, just a light rise in sound enough to make my shoulders tense. When I turned slightly, trying not to seem obvious, I saw the same headlights rounding the corner behind me. They weren't speeding, but they weren't keeping distance either. They held the same slow, steady pace I was walking, illuminating the pavement in front of them in a white cone that gradually crept closer. It could have still been coincidence at that point, but something about the timing, how they appeared the moment I reached that bend, made it feel intentional. I crossed the street near a row of empty mailboxes, thinking maybe the driver would turn or continue down a different road. Instead, the truck rolled forward and eased onto the opposite lane, headlights still pointed directly at me. They didn't dim, not even when they clearly should have. They just shone bright, so bright that I had to look down to avoid being blinded. My heartbeat started moving faster then, not enough to feel like panic, just that slow building awareness that something about this situation wasn't right. I tried telling myself I was being dramatic, that maybe the driver simply forgot their brights were on, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to believe that explanation. As I kept walking, I felt the light touch the back of my legs, stretching my shadow out long and distorted in front of me. Every time I glanced sideways, the truck stayed the same distance behind me, not closing the gap but not falling back either. The brightness never softened. In quiet moments between passing insects and rustling leaves, I could hear the faint shift of the engine every few seconds, almost like the driver was adjusting their foot on the pedal while watching me. The idea crawled slowly into my mind that maybe the lights weren't an accident at all. Maybe they were meant to keep me visible. I turned onto a smaller street that branched off toward the older side of the neighborhood, hoping the truck wouldn't follow. But after a moment of silence, I heard that same soft hum curve behind me. The headlights washed across the dying grass on the side of the road, climbing the base of tall wooden fences before settling once again against my back. That's when a strange thought crossed my mind. If someone was trying to intimidate me, why stay so far away? Why not pull closer? The distance they kept almost felt respectful, which somehow made it worse. It was as if whoever was inside wanted to watch without being seen. I finally stopped pretending everything was normal when I reached the footbridge near the creek. I stepped off the path and leaned against the railing, pretending to check something on my phone. The truck rolled forward a few feet and then stopped, headlights hitting the railing beside me and painting the metal a harsh white. I didn't look directly at the truck, but I could see the outline of the cabin through the corner of my eye. The windows looked dark, too dark to see a face or movement inside. I stood there for a moment, pretending to scroll, and I waited to see if the truck would keep going, but it didn't. It just sat there, engine humming quietly, lights burning into the bridge. A cold, tense feeling spread across my stomach then, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of how alone you are. I took a slow breath, not wanting the driver to realize I was nervous, and walked down the path toward the creek, purposely stepping out of the light. For a brief moment, I hoped the truck would simply move on once I was out of its direct line of sight. But the instant I stepped off the path, the headlights shifted, catching the edge of the trees where I was walking. As the beam followed me, even though there was no road there, no reason for the lights to angle that way. It was at that moment I understood the truth. The headlights weren't for the road. They were for me. I moved deeper into the trees, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Branches swayed lightly overhead and the air smelled like damp earth, but all of that faded beneath the sound of the truck's engine idling just beyond the tree line. I crouched low behind a fallen log and watched the light shift slowly back and forth, sweeping the bushes like someone searching. The light didn't waver or dim. It stayed steady, steady in that unnatural way that suggested the driver wasn't just waiting, they were looking. Minutes passed, though they felt longer. I held my breath each time the light drifted closer, expecting to hear a door open or footsteps crunching on gravel, but nothing happened. No movement, no voice, just that constant, patient glow cutting through the dark and the sound of the engine humming like a pulse. Eventually, after what felt like a long time, the headlights began to turn away slowly at first, then fully swinging back toward the road. The truck didn't speed off. It simply rolled backward, straightened out, and then drove away with a smoothness that made my skin crawl. Whoever was inside had decided to leave without ever stepping out. I stayed hidden until the sound of the engine finally dissolved into the night. When I emerged from the trees, the road felt emptier than before, almost too still. The memory of those headlights lingered like afterimages behind my eyes. I walked home the rest of the way with my shoulders tight and my senses sharpened, checking every corner, every quiet driveway, every parked car. Even after I turned onto my street, I found myself glancing behind me, half expecting to see those same lights creeping around the bend. They never did. I don't know who was in that truck or why they followed me like that. Maybe it was someone confused, or someone playing a stupid joke, or someone who changed their mind at the last second. But the part that keeps me awake sometimes is how calmly it all happened. No yelling, no sudden chase, no confrontation. Just a pair of headlights that refused to turn off, illuminating me for miles like they needed to keep me visible, needed to keep me within reach. Some people say the dangerous moments are the loud ones, the obvious ones, but I've learned it's the quiet intentions that are hardest to shake. The ones that don't reveal themselves, the ones that watch without stepping forward. Even now, when I walk home at night, I feel that same heavy awareness in my back whenever headlights appear behind me. And every time they stay on just a little too long, I can't help remembering that night, the steady glow, the silent driver, and the feeling that someone out there had all the time in the world to decide what they wanted from me. Most winter mornings on my commute had a kind of muted stillness to them, the kind that comes right before the sun breaks over the horizon, when everything is tinted in shades of pale blue and gray. I usually left the house early enough that the neighborhood was still half asleep, the streetlights flickering softly as they prepared to shut off, and the air cold enough to numb the tips of my fingers even inside my gloves. The roads in my area didn't get plowed until later in the day, so the thin layer of frost and compressed snow made every sound sharper than usual, the crunch beneath my tires, the soft rattle of ice on the wheel wells, and that faint whistle of wind sneaking through the imperfect seal of my driver's side window. It was the kind of quiet that felt safe because it was predictable. I knew those roads. I knew those mornings. Nothing ever changed. It was halfway through one of those drives when I first noticed the shape behind me. Not the headlights, I hadn't seen those, but the shadow of a vehicle rounding the same bend I had just taken. I remember glancing at the mirror and seeing a dark outline moving through the soft, bluish dawn, and for a second I thought it must have been one of my neighbors heading out early too. People did that sometimes. But something made me check again a few seconds later, and that's when I noticed the lack of glare behind me. There were no headlights reflecting off the road, no faint glow catching the frost on the trees. Just the quiet silhouette of a large truck following at a distance. At first, I brushed it off as someone who didn't want to use their lights. Some people did that on familiar roads, though it wasn't exactly safe. But even as I tried convincing myself it didn't matter, something about the steadiness of the truck's movement caught my attention. It stayed just far enough back that I couldn't make out the details of the cabin or the color of the paint, but close enough that its outline remained clear against the morning haze. I kept driving, listening to the soft rumble of my own engine and reminding myself that other people used the same roads. Still, every time I checked the mirror, the truck looked exactly the same distance, same speed, same quiet trail behind me. It wasn't until I reached a stretch of straight road that the unease really started settling in. The winter light had grown a little brighter, enough that I could finally make out the front grille of the truck. The entire front end looked empty in a way I couldn't describe at first. Then after staring at it for a few seconds more, I realized why it felt strange. There was no front license plate, not even a mounting bracket, just a flat, dark surface where something should have been. I blinked, leaned a little closer to the mirror, and checked again. Nothing, not even scratches where a plate might have been removed. It looked wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like a face missing an essential feature. I tried to shake the feeling off as paranoia, but the moment I slowed down slightly for an icy patch, the truck slowed too. It didn't drift closer or fall behind, it simply matched me. I sped up again once the road cleared, and the truck matched that as well, always keeping the exact same distance. The precision made my stomach tighten. I reminded myself that people tailgate or pace each other accidentally all the time, but this didn't feel accidental. It felt attentive. By the time I reached the first intersection, my nerves were already on edge. It was a four-way stop with barely any traffic at that hour, and I rolled through cautiously, checking left and right even though the road was empty. The truck behind me stopped a few feet back, still without headlights, and for a moment in the corner of my mirror, I thought I saw a shape inside the cabin shift, like the driver was leaning forward. I couldn't see a face. The windows were either tinted or the dawn light was too dim. But whatever was inside stayed still as the truck followed me through the intersection and back onto the main road. The next irregularity felt small at first, but it sank into my nerves fast. I took a sudden right turn, sharper than necessary, onto a road I never used just to see what the truck would do. And even though I didn't signal until the last second, the truck turned right behind me without hesitation. No pause, no moment of confusion, just a smooth, controlled movement that felt too perfectly timed. That was when the cold in my hands stopped being about the weather. I drove another half-mile down the unfamiliar road and turned again, this time onto a narrow street that led past a closed summer campground. The road was curved enough that I lost sight of the truck for a moment, and I held my breath without realizing it. But as soon as I straightened out, the truck appeared again behind me, still without headlights, still the same distance back, still following as if we were connected. My mind raced through explanations, but none of them felt right. Why would someone drive without headlights in the early morning? Why follow someone down roads they didn't know? Why remove or hide a license plate? And why keep perfect pace for miles without making a move to pass or fall back? The tension reached a point where I could feel my heartbeat pulsing in my neck. The icy road required careful driving, but all I wanted to do was speed away. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that maybe I was overreacting, but every small doubt was countered by another glance in the mirror. The truck never wavered, never blinked, never changed. As I approached the old train crossing, the one that almost always forced me to stop, I felt a wave of dread wash through me. The lights started flashing. The arms began lowering, and there was no way around it. I had to stop. I came to a slow, careful halt right at the white line, and a second later, the truck pulled up behind me and stopped too. Only this time, it didn't keep its usual distance. As it rolled forward slowly, creeping closer until I could see the outline of the grille clearly in my rearview mirror, filling the entire frame like a silent wall of metal. My seat vibrated with the low rumble of its engine, and the sound seemed to grow louder, deeper, almost like the truck itself was exhaling against my car. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. I stared straight ahead at the passing train, waiting for it to end, waiting for the arms to lift, waiting for any sign the truck would stop inching closer. The train felt endless, each car dragging out the seconds. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. When the crossing finally cleared, I pressed the gas just enough to move forward steadily, not wanting to seem panicked. The truck followed, keeping that same suffocating closeness for the next stretch of road. I fought the urge to accelerate too quickly. I didn't want to slide on the ice. I didn't want to lose control. But the fear in my chest pushed harder than caution, and by the time the city limits finally came into view, I was nearly shaking. And then, without warning, the truck was gone. It didn't turn onto a side street. It didn't slow down behind me. One moment it was filling my mirror, and the next moment my mirror reflected only the pale winter light and the faint outline of buildings ahead. I drove another 100 feet, then another 100, checking the mirror again and again. The road behind me was empty, completely empty. There was no place the truck could have turned off, not in the few seconds I wasn't looking. It simply wasn't there anymore. As I kept driving all the way to work, parked crookedly in my usual spot, and sat there for a long minute with my engine running, trying to understand what had happened. My breath fogged the windshield. My hands were ice cold. And all I could think was how the truck had followed every move I made, how perfectly it had matched me, how close it had come at that train crossing. For weeks afterward, every time I drove that route, I found myself checking the mirrors constantly, half expecting to see that dark shape appear again, the one with no headlights, no plate, no identity at all. It never did, but the feeling never left me. It lingered in the space behind my shoulder, in the quiet moments just before dawn, in the way shadows collect at the edges of the road. Someone was in that truck. Someone followed me with purpose. And someone knew how to disappear just as deliberately as they appeared. The worst part is realizing that nothing loud or dramatic ever happened. No chase, no confrontation, just a truck with no license plate moving with quiet intention through the early morning frost, close enough for me to feel its presence, close enough for me to feel its attention, and then gone, leaving behind a silence that still feels heavier than the moment itself. I used to leave the house early on school mornings, long before most of the neighborhood came alive. Those hours always felt strangely peaceful, the sky still dim, the streetlights buzzing with that low electric hum, and the cool air carrying the damp smell of dew settling across lawns. My street was one of those quiet suburban lanes where nothing ever really changed. Same cars in the same driveways. Same porch lights left on by the same people who forgot to turn them off. And at that time of day, the only sounds were my shoes brushing across the sidewalk and the soft rustling of trees shaking off the night. It was so still most mornings that I could hear my own breathing. I think that's why what happened stood out so sharply. You get used to a certain rhythm, and when something doesn't match it, you notice even before you understand why. That morning, I stepped out of my house with my backpack slung over one shoulder and immediately noticed a shape parked halfway down the street. At first, it didn't register as strange. It looked like a standard white delivery truck, the kind you'd expect to see outside someone's home around midday or maybe late afternoon, but never at 6 in the morning. And definitely not on my street. No one on that block ordered anything large, no moving trucks ever came, no contractors visited. It just wasn't that kind of place. The truck sat perfectly still, no interior light, no hazard blinkers, nothing to suggest activity. It looked like it had been placed there deliberately, like someone had driven it in overnight and turned off the engine without caring who noticed. As I walked down the sidewalk, I kept glancing at it in the corner of my eye. There was something off about the way it was parked, too close to the curb, but angled ever so slightly toward the sidewalk, as if the person behind the wheel hadn't really paid attention. I slowed when I got close enough to see the front. The windows were tinted darker than you'd expect for a normal delivery company, and the side of the truck had no logo. No paint. No markings. Just a blank white surface that looked strangely clean for something out on the road. I couldn't explain why, but the sight of it made the back of my neck tighten. It shouldn't have been there. Nothing about it fit with the rest of the neighborhood. I tried convincing myself it wasn't a big deal, that maybe someone ordered a new fridge or a big piece of furniture, something heavy enough that the delivery company came early. But that didn't make sense either. People didn't schedule deliveries that early, not on weekdays, not in this area. And if it really were a delivery truck, why was there no company name? The longer I looked at it, the more I felt like the truck wasn't waiting for a house. It was waiting for something else. I kept walking, trying to push the unease aside, but I couldn't help checking over my shoulder once I got to the bus stop at the end of the street. From that angle, I saw something I hadn't noticed earlier. The driver's seat wasn't empty. Someone was sitting there. The silhouette was faint through the tinted glass, but it was unmistakable. The shape of a person leaning slightly forward like they were watching something or someone. My chest tightened without warning, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe properly. The figure didn't move, not even when I stared longer than I meant to. They just stayed there, completely still, facing the direction I had walked. I tried lowering my gaze, pretending I hadn't seen anything, but my mind kept replaying the image. Why was someone sitting in a truck like that before sunrise? Why were they parked on a street where no deliveries ever happened? Why were they watching the route I took every day? The questions pressed harder the longer I waited at the bus stop, and with each passing second, the presence of that truck built an invisible pressure behind me, like a weight on the back of my skull. A couple of minutes later, the bus still wasn't there, and I felt cold knowing the truck hadn't moved at all. The silhouette remained exactly where it had been, angled toward me with that unnatural stillness. I tried turning around casually, pretending I was just checking the street, but the moment my eyes landed on the windshield, the silhouette shifted. Not a lot, just enough to confirm the driver was aware of me. The shape leaned forward slightly, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, that single motion sent a jolt of fear deep into my stomach. It was such a subtle shift, but it didn't feel accidental. It felt responsive. Just then, I made a decision I'd never made before. I stepped away from the bus stop. Something inside me said I needed to move, needed to get out of the open. Instead of walking back toward my street or to a busier road, I turned down a side path that cut behind a row of houses. I'd never taken that route in the morning. It always felt too isolated, but somehow the isolation felt safer than standing in the open. The second I turned off the main road, I heard something soft behind me. It was a low mechanical sound, almost like an engine turning over. I stopped, heart hammering, and listened. The noise paused for a moment. Then it came again, louder this time. The truck had started its engine. My mouth went dry as I quickened my pace down the narrow path. The gravel crunched loud beneath my shoes, and every footstep echoed sharper than normal, like the morning air had suddenly thickened. The wind was almost non-existent, and that stillness made me hyper-aware of every small sound. I kept glancing between the fences on both sides, expecting at any moment to see the top corner of the truck glide past the houses. The path eventually curved toward the playground behind the elementary school, and as I rounded that bend, I caught sight of movement on the road beyond the fence, the truck rolling slowly, as though trying not to make noise. It was following the path indirectly, adjusting its angle to stay aligned with wherever I was walking. The fences blocked most of the truck from view, but I could see enough to know it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't using the main street. It wasn't following the road I took to the bus stop anymore. It was repositioning itself, tracking me from the other side of the yards. My breathing turned shallow. I moved as quickly as I could without running, but every time I looked through a gap in the fence, the truck was gliding in parallel with me, slipping between parked cars and empty driveways like it knew exactly where I'd come out. I didn't understand how it could know. I'd never taken that route before. There was no reason for anyone, especially someone in an unmarked truck, to anticipate my movement. When I finally reached the end of the path near the school parking lot, I paused behind the bike racks, hiding myself from view. The morning light had grown stronger, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I waited, gripping the cold metal rail as my heart pounded against my ribs. After nearly a minute of silence, I dared to peek past the corner of the rack. Well, the truck was there. Not on the street, not moving, just sitting perfectly still at the mouth of the parking lot, angled toward the path entrance as if it had been waiting for me to come out. The driver's silhouette was turned toward the bike racks, toward me. And even from that distance, even through tinted glass, I felt the same strange certainty I had felt earlier. The person inside was looking directly at me. But for a long moment, I didn't move. The school was still closed, no one else was around. The truck didn't inch forward this time. It didn't honk or flash lights or try to draw attention. It simply watched. The engine hummed softly, steady, and patient, like the person inside had nowhere else to be and nothing else to do except wait for me to make a mistake. Eventually, a car turned onto the street, heading toward the school. The truck reacted instantly. Its headlights blinked on, the engine revved quietly, and it reversed slowly, slipping away from the parking lot with an eerie calmness. By the time the car reached the entrance, the truck had disappeared beyond the next intersection. No screech of tires, no rush, just a smooth departure as if the driver had decided their time was up for the moment. I stayed hidden until the parking lot started filling with parents and teachers. Only then did I step out, still unsure whether the truck would circle back. It never did, not that morning, not any morning after, but for weeks every time I left the house I checked the street first. I scanned for unmarked white trucks. I studied every parked vehicle, and I never shook the certainty that the truck wasn't there for a delivery. It wasn't lost. It wasn't waiting for a house number or directions. It was waiting for opportunities. And the way it left so calmly, so quietly, makes me think it didn't abandon the idea. It simply postponed it. Whoever was inside that truck wasn't rushing. They had time, they knew the neighborhood, and they had already watched me long enough to learn at least one thing about me, where I walk every morning and how early I leave the house. Now, every time I step outside before sunrise, I catch myself searching the dim edges of the street for that blank white shape and the silhouette that doesn't move until I do. I used to think the forest around my cabin was the quietest place on earth at night. During the day, it buzzed with distant chainsaws and the low groan of machinery from logging crews miles up the ridge. But once the sun dipped behind the tree line, everything softened. The wind threaded through branches with a soft, steady sigh, and the creek behind the cabin murmured in a rhythm that lulled me to sleep most nights. The whole place felt suspended, isolated in a peaceful way, like the rest of the world was too far away to reach me. When I first moved in, I loved that silence. It felt like I'd finally found a pocket of the world untouched by anything urgent or loud. The first time I saw the logging truck, it seemed like just another piece of forestry equipment passing through. It was early evening, the sky still holding onto streaks of orange and pink, and I was chopping kindling near the shed. I heard the low grind of a diesel engine rolling down the gravel road and watched as a long logging truck crept past the cabin, moving much slower than the ones I was used to seeing. The driver sat high in the cab, head turned toward the tree line, almost like he was scanning it for something. He didn't look at me, not directly, but the angle of his head made me feel like he was aware of me anyway. I didn't think much of it. They were probably ending a shift, or lost, or checking routes before winter came. But then the same truck passed again that night, long after the crews were gone. It was close to midnight, and I was reading in bed when I heard the unmistakable rumble of a diesel engine rolling over gravel. The sound cut through the quiet like a physical vibration, deep enough to shake the glass in the window. At first I figured maybe someone was working late, maybe a storm warning had gone out and they were securing equipment. But as I stepped to the window and peeked through the blinds, I saw the same long truck idling on the road with its lights off. No signals, no movement. Just sitting there, completely dark except for the faint glow of its dashboard leaking through the cab windows. That was the moment my stomach tightened a little, the first flicker that something wasn't normal. Logging crews never operated at night. They didn't sit on the road with their lights off. They didn't idle outside people's homes. But I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe they'd had an issue with equipment or were waiting for someone to pick them up. The excuses came easily then, before I had any reason to assume otherwise. Well, the next night it came back. Same time, same low vibration rolling through the trees. I didn't get out of bed that time. I just lay there listening as the truck slowed to a stop in the same spot. I waited for a door to open, for footsteps, for anything that sounded like a human being doing something, but there was nothing. The engine hummed quietly for a few minutes, then faded as the truck rolled away, slow and steady until the sound dissolved into the forest. By the third night, the unease had settled deeper. It was harder to pretend it didn't bother me. Long logging trucks weren't subtle, and this one behaved in a way I couldn't explain. It passed during the day, slowly scanning the forest, and returned at night with its lights off, idling like it was listening. On the fourth night, I decided to stay awake, sitting in the dark living room with the lamp off and a blanket around my shoulders. The silence was thick enough to hear the creak outside and the occasional crack of settling wood in the cabin walls. When the truck finally arrived, I felt it before I heard it. The floorboards gave a faint vibration, a slow tremor that worked its way up my feet. Then the low hum of the engine drifted through the trees again, stopping in that same stretch of road. I stayed still, watching through the narrow gap between my curtains. The truck looked just as it had before, long trailer, empty logs racks, darkened cab, but as I stared, I noticed something new. The driver's door was open. Not swung wide, just barely ajar, like someone had stepped out quietly and didn't bother closing it. There were no footsteps on the gravel, no crunch of leaves, no sound of someone moving around the truck, just that open door held in place by stillness. I didn't breathe for a moment. I just watched the black shape of it against the faint sky, feeling my heart tick slowly but hard against my ribs. After a while, I couldn't tell how long the door shut on its own. A soft click, subtle enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. The truck rolled away afterward, unhurried and smooth. I barely slept that night. The next day I drove into town for groceries, trying to shake off the heaviness in my chest. When I mentioned the truck to the clerk, more out of casual conversation than real complaint, she gave me a puzzled look. "There's no logging crew up there this season," she said. "The company shut that line down last year." I asked again, certain I misunderstood, but she repeated it. The ridge had been closed. No trucks should have been anywhere near my road, no crews, no equipment, nothing. I felt something cold settle in the pit of my stomach on the drive home. That night, I didn't plan to watch for it. I told myself I wouldn't, but the fear of not knowing was worse than sitting in the dark. So I waited again, lights off, listening to the forest breathe around me. It took longer this time. Long enough to make me think maybe I had imagined everything. Maybe the clerk was wrong, or maybe it was a random driver passing through. And then I heard it. The engine sounded closer than before, louder, slower. The gravel crunched under its tires with a weight that made the walls of the cabin seem thinner. When I looked out the window, my breath caught in my throat. The truck wasn't on the road this time. It was halfway down my driveway. No headlights, no trailer light, no illumination from the cab. Just a massive dark shape rolling silently closer to the cabin. I backed away from the window as the truck came to a stop. The trailer loomed past the tree line, its silhouette almost blending into the forest beyond. The cab sat angled toward the front door of my home, and even in the darkness I could make out the faint outline of the driver's seat. Someone was inside, not moving, watching. I didn't turn on any lights, I didn't open the door, I didn't breathe too loudly. I just stood in the center of the living room, heart pounding, waiting to hear footsteps on the porch or a knock or a voice. But minutes ticked by in complete silence. No door opened, no engine revved, no movement. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, the truck's engine gave a soft shift in tone, like someone had touched the pedals. Then it backed out of the driveway with that same unnatural, slow control. It rolled up the gravel, turned onto the main road without lights, and disappeared behind the bend without a single sign that the driver had ever moved. I called the sheriff's office the next morning. They sent someone out. The deputy walked the road, checked the gravel, and studied the tire impressions. He mentioned something that made my skin crawl. The tracks weren't fresh. They were layered. Multiple nights' worth of identical imprints, like the truck had returned again and again, stopping in the same exact place every time. So when I asked if they could identify the truck, he shook his head. "There's no one running equipment up here anymore," he said. "If you see it again, call right away." But I never saw the truck again. No rumbling engine, no late-night idling, no dark cab watching me through the windows. Just silence. Silence that felt heavier now. Silence that felt like something had paused its interest, not lost it. Sometimes I think about that open driver's door, the shape I couldn't see inside the cab, and all the nights the truck returned before stepping onto my driveway. And sometimes, especially when the wind shifts through the trees in a certain way, I feel the cabin vibrate ever so slightly, like something huge has passed by without making a sound. So the worst part isn't not knowing who was inside that truck. It's knowing they knew exactly where I lived. They knew when I was awake. They knew when I was watching. And they left only when they decided they were done. Not when I was safe. I had a habit of grocery shopping late in the afternoon, usually after work, when the sun was still warm but you could feel the day beginning to wind down. The store near my place sat on the edge of a big open parking lot, the kind with too many spaces for how few people ever showed up. At that time of day, the lot always looked washed out and wide, sunlight stretching long shadows under the cart returns and across the faded white lines. It was the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever happened. Familiar, predictable, I liked that. I didn't have to think much when I went there, grab what I needed, walk out, head home to dinner and a quiet evening. That routine always felt safe. The day this happened, everything started exactly the same. I remember stepping out of the store with 2 bags, the warm air brushing my hair back gently and the slightly metallic sound of the automatic doors sliding shut behind me. The lot was almost empty, a few cars near the entrance, a couple farther out. My car sat close to the middle, under the patch of open sky where no trees cast shadows. I wasn't thinking about anything except maybe what show I'd put on later. But then I noticed a truck parked across from my row, an older black pickup, matte paint. No shine, no decals, no visible rust, just that dull surface that doesn't reflect much light. It wasn't strange for someone to be parked there, but the truck was angled slightly toward my car, like whoever parked it wanted a direct view of my spot. I tried brushing it off at first, but I kept glancing at it as I walked, something about the stillness of the cabin catching my attention. There was no movement inside, no shifting silhouette, no sign someone was gathering their things or starting the engine. It just sat there, engine off, windows dark. The kind of dark where you couldn't see whether someone was behind the glass or not. I pressed the door button on my key, hearing the faint click as my locks disengaged and loaded my bags quietly. But when I closed the trunk and glanced back toward the truck, a tingling sensation crept up the back of my neck. The truck's position hadn't changed, but the feeling that someone was watching had settled just a little too firmly. I got in my car, locked the doors immediately, more out of habit than fear, I told myself, and started the engine. The radio came on low, the air conditioner humming, and for a moment the normal sounds inside the car grounded me. But the moment I shifted into reverse, the truck's headlights flicked on. Not bright, not sudden, just a soft glow like someone had turned the key halfway. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was coincidence, that maybe someone had just returned to their vehicle. I waited a couple seconds, giving them the chance to back out or move first. The truck didn't move. The headlights stayed on. I backed out slowly, pretending I wasn't bothered, but the moment I shifted into drive and started steering toward the exit, the truck's engine turned over. A low, deep rumble that felt louder than it should have in such an open space. I checked my rearview mirror, expecting to see the truck pulling out. Instead, it rolled forward only a foot or two and stopped again, angled in the exact direction I was heading. It didn't follow yet, but the alignment was too precise to ignore. My pulse sped up. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were leaving too. Maybe I was overreacting. But as I approached the exit, the truck pulled out of its space fully, turning onto the same lane I was driving down. Not fast, not aggressive, just slow, steady movement that kept an uncomfortable pace behind me. The distance wasn't close enough to claim tailgating, but it wasn't far enough to feel casual either. It felt like intention. I turned right at the parking lot stop sign and the truck turned too. I slowed near the traffic light, hoping maybe it would turn left or keep going straight. Instead, it rolled up behind me, keeping the same spacing. I could see the black shape of its hood in my rearview mirror, even though the afternoon light was still bright enough to wash out details. I couldn't see the driver. The glass was too dark. Unease prickled under my skin. I reminded myself again that this could have been nothing, that even weird coincidences happen. But as the light turned green and I continued down the road toward home, the truck's movement stayed too precise. Every time I adjusted my speed, slowing for a curve or a car ahead, the truck adjusted too. When I went a little faster, the truck did the same. It didn't drift. It didn't waver. It just held perfect distance, like it was tethered to me. At the next intersection, I made a left turn I never usually made, one that looped around toward a small business strip instead of my neighborhood. I wanted to see what the truck would do. It signaled and turned left behind me. My stomach tightened. I tried one more test. I pulled into a well-lit area near a coffee shop, a place where cars often pause to let pedestrians cross. The truck didn't stop behind me. It didn't pass either. It slowed just enough to stay parallel, then stopped in the lane across from me, facing me from a distance that felt deliberate. We were positioned like two cars waiting for each other to make the next move. My hands felt slightly cold against the steering wheel. I didn't want to drive home like this. I couldn't risk leading a stranger to my street. So instead, I circled back and took a route toward the police station across town. It wasn't far, but every second felt longer than it should have as the truck followed through each turn with that same unnerving steadiness. When I pulled into the station parking lot, I felt a wave of relief, but it was followed by something stranger. The truck didn't pull in after me. Instead, it slowed on the street, stopping directly across from the entrance. Not blocking traffic, not acting suspiciously enough to draw official attention, just idling there facing the lot, engine rumbling quietly. The afternoon sun glinted off its windshield, making the cabin impossible to see inside. I parked in one of the visitor spots, locked my doors, and stayed still, watching through the windshield. For a few long seconds, neither of us moved. The truck idled, the sound low and steady, almost like breathing. My pulse thudded in my ears as I debated whether to go inside and tell someone or just wait it out. Before I could decide, the truck's engine revved lightly, not speeding up, just shifting tone, and then it pulled away with careful, controlled movement. It didn't accelerate fast. It didn't peel away. It simply rolled down the street, turned at the corner, and disappeared behind a row of buildings. I stayed parked for nearly an hour. An officer walked by once, and I almost said something, but the words stuck in my throat. I didn't know what to explain. A truck followed me felt too vague, too paranoid. It wasn't until I finally left the station and started driving home along a different route, just in case, that I realized how much the encounter had shaken me. Even now, when I pull into a parking lot or see a dark truck idling somewhere it doesn't quite belong, something in me tenses. I never saw the black truck again. No one I talked to remembered seeing one like it in the area. But there's a moment I keep replaying when it first flicked its headlights on as I backed out. The timing had been too perfect, too synchronized. Whoever sat inside that truck wasn't running errands. They weren't distracted. They weren't leaving the store at random. They were waiting. Maybe for me specifically, or maybe for anyone who looked alone enough, predictable enough, distracted enough. But the way the truck moved, calm, patient, responsive, suggested something worse than impulse. It suggested intention. The kind that studies you quietly before acting. The kind that stays silent long enough that you might not even realize how close it got to you. And sometimes, when I walk back to my car after shopping, I still feel the echo of that heaviness in the air. The sensation of being watched from behind dark glass by someone who wasn't finished, just uninterested in being seen. I've always liked driving into the mountains alone. There's something calming about those winding roads, the way the trees seem to lean in just enough to frame the sky, and the slow drop in temperature that signals you're leaving regular life behind for something quieter. On the morning this happened, the air was crisp in that early autumn way where you can see your breath for a moment even though the sun is already climbing. I packed a small bag, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and started up the long road that led toward the trail I'd been meaning to hike for weeks. There was no urgency, no sound except the hum of my tires and the occasional rustle of wind moving across the hood of the car. The radio stayed off. I liked hearing the natural, quiet shift around me. It wasn't until I hit the third switchback that I noticed the truck. It appeared in my rearview mirror like it had come out of nowhere, a rust-colored pickup with a roof rack, the kind you'd expect to see near construction zones or out on backroads where people haul equipment. It wasn't strange to see another vehicle out here, especially on a weekend, but something about how silently it seemed to arrive caught my attention. One moment the road behind me was empty. The next, those dull headlights floated behind me like they'd always been there. I eased around the curve, watching the truck take it a second later, matching my speed perfectly despite the sharp turn. At first, I didn't think much of it. Drivers follow each other on mountain roads all the time. But as I climbed higher, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truck was staying a little too steady, not close enough to be tailgating, but not far enough to feel coincidental. Every time I looked in the mirror, it hovered at the exact same distance, neither gaining nor falling behind. The rust-colored paint blended strangely with the trees when the light hit it just right, creating a dull shimmer that made it look older than it probably was. I tried to focus on the road, telling myself it was just another hiker heading to the trail. But the quiet repetition of seeing it behind me started gnawing at something small inside my chest. I slowed near a scenic turnout, mostly to let the truck pass if it wanted to. But it slowed too, same timing, same rhythm. I didn't stop. I merged back onto the road, my heartbeat picking up without any real reason. Maybe it was just the altitude. Maybe it was the fact that an empty mountain road makes you more aware of every movement around you. As the road began climbing more steeply, I tried speeding up a little just to see how the truck reacted. It reacted immediately. Faster when I sped up, slower when I slowed down, there was no hesitation in its response. None. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter, feeling the leather warm beneath my palms. The air inside the car felt heavier, like the oxygen was thinning even though the altitude wasn't nearly high enough for that. I cracked the window a bit to get some fresh air, and the cold mountain wind brushed the side of my face. It grounded me for a second until I realized I could hear the faint growl of the truck's engine over the wind. It wasn't loud. Just a low, steady rumble sinking itself with every turn I made. So eventually, I reached the dirt road that branched off from the main highway, the one that led deeper into the forest, where hikers parked along a small clearing before trekking up the trail. It wasn't a well-traveled path. If someone followed you up there, you notice. I turned onto the dirt road, feeling the uneven crunch of gravel beneath my tires. And when I checked the mirror again, the truck followed. I don't know why, but that was the moment I felt real fear. Not panic, not a rush of adrenaline, just that quiet, sinking realization that something wasn't right. There aren't many reasons for someone to follow you onto a narrow, unmarked dirt road unless they have the same destination. Or unless they're following you for a reason that has nothing to do with hiking. The trees grew denser the farther I went. Sunlight filtered through the branches in fractured beams, illuminating sections of dust swirling behind the car. I drove slower, not wanting to kick up too much debris. The truck slowed behind me too, maintaining perfect distance. I could see its silhouette more clearly now, old model, the kind with boxier edges, maybe 90s or early 2000s. The rust on the sides didn't look natural anymore. It looked deliberate, like the color had been chosen to make the truck blend into surroundings like these. So eventually, the road narrowed so much that stopping wasn't an option unless I wanted the truck right behind me. I tried reminding myself that lots of people hike on weekends, that maybe there was a trail I didn't know about farther up the road. But the deeper I went, the more obvious it became. No one drove this far without a reason. When the dirt finally opened into a small clearing, the kind hikers use as an unofficial lot, I pulled in and parked on the far side, close to the tree line. I stayed in the car for a moment, pretending to look through my bag while sneaking glances in the mirror. The truck didn't pull in beside me. It didn't leave either. It stopped just short of the clearing, halfway hidden behind a bend, partially obscured by trees. Its engine idled softly, the sound blending eerily with the rustling leaves. I waited. The truck waited too. After a minute or two, I realized the driver hadn't stepped out. No door opened, no movement inside the cab, just stillness. And the longer I sat there, the more suffocating that stillness became. Finally, I grabbed my bag and stepped out, pretending to stretch my legs, trying not to show the tension crawling up my shoulders. I walked slowly toward the start of the trail, feet crunching on dried pine needles. The air smelled faintly of sap and cold soil, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. As halfway toward the trailhead, I turned casually like I was just taking in the view. The truck was still there. Only now it wasn't idling anymore. The engine had gone quiet, completely quiet. The kind of quiet that feels intentional. I stood still for a moment, pretending to look at the distant ridge. But the longer I held my position, the more certain I became. The driver wasn't stepping out because they were watching me, waiting. So I made a decision then. I wasn't hiking, not today. I walked slowly back to the car, controlling my breathing, doing everything I could not to break into a run. The forest felt different now, not peaceful, not calming, just too silent. When I opened my car door, I heard something that made my skin go cold. The truck's engine started again, not instantly, but a beat after I touched my door handle, like someone inside had been waiting for that exact moment. I closed my door carefully, hands shaking despite trying to steady them. As I backed out of the clearing, the truck pulled forward an inch. Just 1 inch, enough to let me know it was still there, still paying attention. I didn't drive recklessly, the road was too narrow, but I didn't look back often either. I kept my eyes fixed forward, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Every twist seemed longer than it had on the way up. Every shadow felt like it hid something. But eventually, after what felt like an entire hour compressed into minutes, I reached the main road. As I turned onto the highway, and for the first time since I'd seen it, I allowed myself to look in the mirror. Well, the truck wasn't there. The road behind me was empty. No dust clouds, no headlights, no rust-colored shape appearing around the bend, just a clean stretch of asphalt leading back down the mountain. I drove the entire way home without stopping, heart slowly settling back into something like normal rhythm. So I never saw the truck again, not on the road, not in town, not anywhere. But what stays with me isn't the following. It isn't the silent engine or the way the truck melted behind the trees like it had been waiting for someone to lead it further in. It's the realization that whoever was inside didn't follow me out of recklessness or confusion. They followed me with expectation, as if they were certain I'd take them somewhere far enough from civilization that no one else would notice. Somewhere quiet, somewhere isolated, somewhere deep in the mountains. And the only reason I'm telling the story now is because, at the last second, I decided not to step into the trees. Nights have a way of holding onto the things we'd rather forget. The quiet stretches of road, the empty parking lots, the flicker of headlights in a mirror, they seem harmless until something in them shifts, reminding us how thin the line is between routine and danger. Listening to these stories, you start to realize it's never the loud moments that stay with you. It's the subtle ones, the steady engine that shouldn't be there, the way someone matches your pace without ever getting close enough to explain why. The fear doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just follows, patient and unblinking. And if you've ever felt that presence behind you, a car that lingered too long, a shadow that didn't quite belong, you know that strange mix of instinct and uncertainty. You know how the world feels different when you're moving through the dark alone, how every reflection in the glass becomes a question you can't fully answer. These stories aren't meant to frighten you, not loudly anyway. They're reminders that most of us have had moments we dismissed, moments that settled deeper than we let ourselves admit. You're not strange for noticing, you're not alone for remembering. If you want to stay with us through more of these quiet, uneasy nights, you're welcome to come back to sit with the stories and let them unfold at their own pace. You can subscribe if you want to keep these nights close or share them with someone who understands the heaviness of an empty road. There's no rush. These stories will always be here, waiting in the dark. But for now, try to rest. Let the night settle around you gently. And if you find yourself driving alone later or hearing an engine hum somewhere behind you, take a breath. Most things pass, most things fade. And the ones that don't, well, we'll talk about those another night.